There's a god who could see the future, and it destroyed him. Not in the way you might think, not through some dramatic fall or cosmic punishment, but slowly, inevitably, like watching a tragedy unfold in slow motion when you know exactly how it ends, but can't do anything to stop it. His name was Apollo, and he was called the most beautiful of all the gods, the bringer of light, the master of music and poetry, the god of prophecy and healing. The Greeks loved him more than almost any other deity. They built magnificent temples in his honor, consulted his oracles before making any major decision, and sang hymns praising his perfection. But here's what they didn't tell you in school, what gets lost in all the golden statues and beautiful myths. Apollo was cursed by the very gift that made him divine. He could see everything that would happen, and he was powerless to change any of it. Every love he pursued would end in tragedy. Every warning he gave would be ignored. Every truth he spoke would be doubted. And he knew all of this before it even began. Imagine that for a moment. Really imagine it. You wake up and you can see your entire future stretching out before you like a roadmap. Every mistake you'll make, every person you'll lose, every heartbreak that's coming, every failure, every moment of joy that will eventually fade. And there's nothing you can do to alter the course. You're not watching your life unfold. You're watching a play where you know every line, every scene, every tragic ending, but you still have to walk out onto that stage and perform it exactly as written. That was Apollo's existence. That was his gift and his curse, wrapped together so tightly they became inseparable. The story begins, as so many Greek myths do, with an act of violence that reverberates through eternity. Apollo was born on the island of Delos to Leto, one of Zeus's many lovers. But Hera, Zeus's wife, was furious about yet another of her husband's infidelities. She cursed Leto, decreeing that she could give birth on no land under the sun. Leto wandered, pregnant and desperate, rejected everywhere she went. Finally, she found Delos, a barren floating island that technically wasn't stable land, and there she gave birth to twins, Artemis first, who then helped deliver her brother Apollo. Even this origin story is significant. Apollo came into the world because of love that caused suffering, born in a place that wasn't quite real, helped into existence by his sister. He entered a world that didn't want him, brought forth through his mother's pain, marked from the beginning by the complications of desire and consequence. And perhaps that's why he understood tragedy so well. He was born from it. But Apollo didn't stay vulnerable for long. Within days of his birth, the myths tell us, he grew into his full power. He was given a golden bow and arrows by Hephaestus, the smith god. And the first thing Apollo did with his divine weapons was hunt down and kill the Python, a massive serpent that had tormented his mother during her pregnancy. He tracked it to Delphi and slew it there, claiming that sacred site as his own. On the very spot where the python died, Apollo established his most famous oracle, the place where mortals would come for thousands of years seeking knowledge of the future. Think about the symbolism here. Apollo's first act as a god was vengeance. His second was taking control of prophecy. The site of death became the place of foresight. The location of violence became the center of wisdom. Apollo built his entire identity on these contradictions, these uncomfortable truths about how knowledge and power are often born from darkness rather than light. The oracle at Delphi became the most important religious site in the entire Greek world. Kings and commoners alike would journey there, bringing offerings, seeking guidance. The Pythia, Apollo's priestess, would enter a trance state and speak prophecies that shaped the course of history. Wars were started or avoided based on her words. Colonies were founded where she directed. Entire civilizations oriented themselves around the cryptic messages that came from Apollo through his oracle. But here's where it gets interesting. The prophecies were always true. Always. but they were also always misunderstood. This wasn't an accident, this was the point. Apollo gave mortals the truth, but he gave it to them in ways they couldn't properly comprehend until after the events had already unfolded. It was like he was offering them a map written in a language they'd only learned to read after they'd already reached their destination. Take the story of King Croesus of Lydia. Croesus was one of the wealthiest monarchs in the ancient world, and he wanted to expand his empire by attacking Persia. But being a careful king, he consulted the oracle at Delphi first. The oracle told him, "If you cross the river, a great empire will fall." Croesus was delighted. He took this as confirmation that he would destroy the Persian Empire. He gathered his armies, crossed the river, and attacked. He was utterly defeated. The great empire that fell was his own. The prophecy was completely accurate. Croesus had simply assumed it meant what he wanted it to mean. This pattern repeats throughout Apollo's myths. He tells the truth is ignored or misinterpreted, tragedy follows. And Apollo, who saw it all coming, who knew exactly how the misunderstanding would unfold, had to watch it happen anyway. Because here's the thing about prophecy. The future isn't being created by the prediction. The future already exists, and the prophecy is just revealing it. Apollo wasn't causing these tragedies, he was witnessing them before they occurred, powerless to prevent them, even though he could see them coming with perfect clarity. Now let's talk about love, because this is where Apollo's story becomes genuinely heartbreaking. For a god of light and beauty, Apollo had perhaps the worst romantic history of any figure in mythology. Every person he loved either died, rejected him, or was transformed into something else to escape him. And the cruelest part is that he knew this would happen. Every time he felt love beginning to bloom in his divine heart, he must have known, must have seen the ending waiting at the end of that path. And yet, he pursued it anyway. Because what else could he do? Stop feeling? Stop loving? Deny the emotions that made him more than just a cold oracle dispensing fate? The most famous of Apollo's romantic romances is the story of Daphne. Apollo saw her and was overwhelmed with love, but this love wasn't random. Eros, the god of desire, had struck Apollo with a golden arrow that caused intense attraction. At the same time, Eros struck Daphne with a lead arrow that caused revulsion toward love. So Apollo pursued her, desperate and besotted, while she ran from him, terrified. He chased her through forests and over hills, calling out his credentials. "I am a god. I am the son of Zeus. I can give you immortality," as if love could be won through a resume. Daphne ran faster, and Apollo ran faster, and the gap never closed. Finally, when she couldn't run anymore, when Apollo was about to reach her, she cried out to her father, the river god, to save her. And he did. He transformed her into a laurel tree. Apollo reached for the woman he loved and found his arms closing around bark and leaves. He stood there, holding a tree that had moments before been the person who consumed his heart, and he wept. Then he declared the laurel tree sacred to him. He said he would wear laurel wreaths forever as a symbol of his love. He turned his romantic tragedy into an eternal memorial. But imagine being Apollo in that moment. Did he see it coming? As he ran after Daphne, as he called out to her, as he closed the distance, did he already know that his hands would close around wood instead of flesh? Did he see the moment of her transformation waiting in the future clear as crystal and run toward it anyway because the script was already written? The myths don't tell us, but knowing what we know about Apollo's gifts, it's hard to imagine he didn't see it, which means his love story wasn't a tragedy of bad luck. It was a tragedy of terrible knowledge, of loving someone while simultaneously seeing the exact moment and manner in which you would lose them. And Daphne wasn't the only one. There was Cassandra, the Trojan princess. Apollo offered her the gift of prophecy in exchange for her love. She accepted the gift, but then refused him. Enraged, Apollo cursed her. She would retain the ability to see the future, but no one would ever believe her prophecies. Think about what he did there. He gave her his gift and his curse simultaneously. He made her like himself, Someone who sees the truth, speaks the truth, and watches in agony as the truth is rejected. Cassandra warned Troy about the wooden horse. She told them exactly what would happen. They called her mad and ignored her. She watched her entire city fall, knowing she'd seen it coming, knowing she'd tried to warn them, knowing it was always going to happen exactly as it did. Apollo created another version of himself in Cassandra. Was it revenge? Or was it something darker and sadder? A desperate attempt to have someone who understood what it meant to carry the burden of unheeded prophecy. Then there was Hyacinthus, the beautiful Spartan prince. Apollo loved him genuinely, and for a time it seemed like this love might be different. They spent their days together, Apollo teaching Hyacinthus athletics and music. One day they were throwing a discus together, and Apollo threw it far. Hyacinthus ran to catch it, eager to impress the god he adored. But Zephyrus, the west wind, who was jealous of Apollo's love, blew the discus off course. It struck Hyacinthus in the head and killed him instantly. Apollo tried everything to save him. He used all his healing powers, all his divine arts, but even a god cannot reverse death once it's claimed someone. He held Hyacinthus as the young prince died, and from the blood that spilled, Apollo caused the hyacinth flower to grow, marked with marks that resembled the Greek word for alas. Another love, another memorial, another moment of beauty transformed into eternal sorrow. Did Apollo see this coming too? Did he watch himself fall in love with Hyacinthus while simultaneously seeing the discus's trajectory, the moment of impact, the blood on the ground? Did he love him anyway, knowing it would end in exactly this kind of heartbreak? The myths suggest yes, because that's who Apollo was. The god who saw the future but couldn't stop loving, couldn't stop hoping, couldn't stop trying even though he knew the outcome. Here's where we need to pause and ask a deeper question. What does it mean to have knowledge without power? We usually think of knowledge as a form of power. We say knowledge is power like it's an axiom. But Apollo proves that's not always true. He had infinite knowledge and almost no power to change what that knowledge revealed. He could see the future perfectly and still had to watch it unfold exactly as predicted. His knowledge wasn't power, it was prison. In our modern world, we're obsessed with prediction, with forecasting, with knowing what's coming. We build massive computer models to predict the weather, the stock market, election outcomes. We consult experts and futurists. We try to glimpse what's ahead so we can prepare, adjust, optimize. We think that if we just had better information, we could control our destinies. But Apollo's myth suggests something different. It suggests that perfect knowledge of the future might not free us at all. It might trap us in a loop of helpless foresight, where we see the mistakes coming but make them anyway because that's what we were always going to do. There's a modern physics concept called the block universe theory, which suggests that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. In this view, time isn't flowing like a river. Instead, all moments exist at once, and our consciousness is simply moving through them, experiencing them in sequence. If that's true, then the future is already there, already determined, already real. We just haven't experienced it yet. That was Apollo's reality. He existed with access to the block universe. He could see all of time at once. And it didn't give him freedom. It showed him that freedom might be an illusion. But let's not paint Apollo as purely tragic. He was also a god of incredible artistry and beauty. He played the lyre with such skill that when he performed, all of nature stopped to listen. Rivers would pause their flowing, birds would cease their singing, even the gods themselves would fall silent, transfixed by the music Apollo created. His art was his refuge, perhaps the one place where the future didn't matter, because music exists purely in the present moment. When you're lost in a perfect melody, there is no past or future. There is only the note that's sounding right now, the harmony that's forming in this instant. Apollo taught music to mortals. He gave them poetry. He inspired the muses, who in turn inspired all human creativity. In this way, Apollo's gift to humanity wasn't prophecy, it was art. It was the ability to create beauty that transcends time, that speaks across centuries, that connects human souls across the vast distances of culture and history. When we listen to music that moves us, when we read poetry that captures something ineffable, when we experience art that shifts something deep inside us, we're touching Apollo's truest gift. There's a famous story about a music contest between Apollo and Marsyas, a satyr who claimed he could play the flute better than Apollo played the lyre. They agreed to compete, with King Midas acting as judge. Marsyas played brilliantly, and for a time it seemed he might actually win. But then Apollo did something clever. He challenged Marsyas to play his instrument upside down while singing at the same time. Apollo could do this with the lyre. Marsyas couldn't do it with the flute. Apollo won the contest. And then, in a moment that reveals the darker side of his nature, Apollo flayed Marsyas alive for his hubris. The beautiful god of music, the bringer of light, committed an act of shocking cruelty. From Marsyas's blood came a river, and from the tears of his mourners came more. Beauty and brutality, creation and destruction, all flowing from the same divine source. This is important because it reminds us that Apollo wasn't just light. He was also the god of plague. He could shoot arrows that brought healing or disease depending on his mood. He could bless with inspiration or curse with madness. The same hands that created the most beautiful music could destroy utterly. He contained multitudes, contradictions, impossible paradoxes. He was everything at once, healer and destroyer, truth-teller and riddler, the god of rational thought and prophetic frenzy. Maybe that's why the Greeks loved him so much, because he represented the full spectrum of what it means to be conscious and aware. He showed that knowledge and understanding don't make life simpler, they make it more complex. They reveal layers of meaning and contradiction that can't be resolved, only experienced. Let's talk about his relationship with his twin sister, Artemis, because this is one of the few relationships in Apollo's mythology that wasn't defined by tragedy. Artemis was his mirror in many ways. Where he was the god of the sun, she was the goddess of the moon. Where he brought prophecy, she brought the wild hunt. Where he represented civilization and order, she represented nature and freedom. But they loved each other fiercely. They protected each other. When their mother Leto was insulted by Niobe, who boasted that she had more children and was therefore superior, Apollo and Artemis worked together to kill all of Niobe's children with their arrows. It was brutal, excessive, a divine act of vengeance. But it was also an act of loyalty and love between siblings who had each other's backs unconditionally. Artemis was perhaps the only being in the universe who understood Apollo, who saw him fully and accepted him completely. She knew about his failed loves, his burden of prophecy, his contradictions and cruelties, and she loved him anyway. In a life defined by alienation and tragic isolation, the isolation of knowing what others don't, of seeing what others can't, Apollo had Artemis. She was his constant, his anchor, the one relationship that didn't end in transformation or death or heartbreak. There's something deeply human in that. No matter how gifted or cursed we are, no matter what burdens we carry, having one person who truly sees us and doesn't turn away makes existence bearable. Apollo, for all his divinity, needed that too. Now let me take you to one of the most revealing stories in all of Apollo's mythology, his servitude to King Admetus. Apollo killed the Cyclopes who had forged Zeus's thunderbolts. He did this in revenge because Zeus had killed Apollo's son Asclepius with one of those thunderbolts. Asclepius had become so skilled at healing that he could bring people back from death, which upset the natural order. Zeus struck him down, and Apollo, in grief and rage, killed the Cyclopes. Zeus was furious. He wanted to throw Apollo into Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. But Leto intervened on behalf of her son, and Zeus agreed to a different punishment. Apollo would have to serve a mortal king for 1 year as a common shepherd. Apollo ended up serving King Admetus of Phaerae. And here's where the story becomes beautiful and strange.
Apollo, the god of light and prophecy and music, the divine archer and healer, spent a year as a shepherd. He watched over sheep, he played his lyre to the animals. He lived simply, humbly, stripped of his godly privileges. And something unexpected happened. He was happy.
For 1 year, Apollo didn't have to be the god of prophecy. He didn't have to see the future or speak truths that would be ignored. He was just a shepherd, living in the eternal present of pastoral life, where the only concerns were the health of the flock and the quality of the grass. His music wasn't divine performance. It was just sound in the air, enjoyed or not enjoyed by sheep who didn't understand what they were hearing. There was no weight to it, no cosmic significance. It was pure. Apollo was so grateful for this experience that he blessed Admetus's household. He even helped Admetus win the hand of Alcestis, one of the few genuinely good love stories in Greek mythology, by helping him complete impossible tasks. And when Apollo's year of service ended, when he returned to Olympus and resumed his divine duties, you have to wonder, did he miss it? Did he long for those simple days when he was nobody special, just a shepherd with a lyre and a flock, living moment to moment without the burden of foresight? This story reveals something crucial about Apollo that we need to understand. His gifts were burdens. His powers were chains. The very things that made him divine and special and worthy of worship were the things that made him suffer. He was the god who saw too much, knew too much, carried too much. And for 1 brief year, he got to set it all down and just exist. We see this pattern in human lives too, don't we? The gifted child who's crushed by expectations, the brilliant mind that can't stop analyzing and overthinking until paralysis sets in, the person with profound empathy who feels everyone's pain and is overwhelmed by it. Gifts become burdens when they isolate us, when they set us apart, when they make it impossible to just be present in the moment without seeing all the layers of meaning and consequence radiating out from every action. Apollo's year as a shepherd suggests that maybe the ultimate luxury, the greatest gift, is the ability to not see, to not know, to not be special, to just exist, simply and completely, in the now. Let's return to the oracle at Delphi one more time, because there's an inscription there that reveals everything we need to know about Apollo's philosophy. Above the entrance to his temple were written 2 phrases, "Know thyself" and "Nothing in excess." These weren't random wisdom, they were Apollo's fundamental teachings to humanity. Know thyself, understand your nature, your limitations, your place in the cosmos. Nothing in excess. Don't overreach, don't claim more than your share, don't try to be more than what you are. And yet, Apollo himself struggled with both of these principles. Did he truly know himself? This god of contradictions who was healer and destroyer, who loved beauty but committed atrocities, who saw the future but couldn't change it. And nothing in excess? He loved excessively, felt excessively, responded excessively. He was a god of extremes, trying to teach moderation. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Apollo was teaching what he himself needed to learn. Maybe the wisdom inscribed above his temple wasn't a pronouncement of mastery, but an aspiration, a goal, a reminder of what even a god struggles to achieve. The oracle spoke truths, but the god who channeled those truths was still trying to understand his own nature, still trying to find balance, still trying to exist without the excess that kept destroying everything he touched. There's a version of Apollo that emerges when you look at all these stories together, and it's more complex than the golden god of light we usually imagine. This Apollo is someone who contains profound wisdom and profound ignorance simultaneously. He can see the future of empires, but can't understand why love keeps escaping him. He can heal plagues, but can't heal his own wounds. He creates beauty and commits atrocities. He is the most beloved god and the most isolated. He is light itself, but light that's aware of its own shadow. In many ways, Apollo represents consciousness itself, the blessing and curse of being aware, of knowing, of understanding. Animals don't suffer from foreknowledge. They exist in the present, responding to immediate circumstances without agonizing over past mistakes or future consequences.
But humans, like Apollo, have the curse of time awareness. We remember our failures, we anticipate our deaths, we see patterns and predict outcomes. We carry the past and the future with us constantly, weighing down the present moment with everything that was and everything that might be.
Apollo shows us what happens when that awareness reaches its ultimate extreme. When you can see everything, when there are no mysteries left, when every outcome is known before it unfolds. That's not enlightenment. That's a kind of existential imprisonment. The tragedy of Apollo is the tragedy of perfect knowledge. It's the realization that understanding everything doesn't solve anything. It just makes you aware of exactly how unsolvable everything is. But here's the twist. The strange hope at the center of Apollo's story. He kept going. Despite knowing how every love would end, he kept loving. Despite knowing his warnings would be ignored, he kept warning. Despite knowing his prophecies would be misunderstood, he kept speaking truth. Despite the burden of foresight, he kept creating music and poetry and art, those timeless expressions of the eternal now that transcended his knowledge of their eventual fading. Apollo didn't give up. He didn't withdraw from existence or stop feeling or become cold and distant. He remained engaged with life, with love, with beauty, with truth, even though he could see that engagement would lead to suffering. And maybe that's the real teaching, the real wisdom hidden beneath all the myths and oracles and tragic romances. Maybe Apollo is showing us that knowing the ending doesn't mean the story isn't worth living. Maybe consciousness, with all its burdens and sorrows and awareness of inevitable loss, is still precious. Maybe the point isn't to escape the tragedy, but to live it fully, beautifully, defiantly, creating meaning and beauty even in the face of certain ending. Think about an artist who knows their work will eventually decay or be forgotten. They create anyway. Think about a parent who knows their children will suffer and struggle and eventually die. They love anyway. Think about any of us, knowing that we're mortal, that everything we build will crumble, that everyone we love will be lost, that all our efforts will ultimately dissolve into entropy and time. And yet, we get up in the morning, we make coffee, we care about things, we try, we love, we create. We persist in making meaning even though we know the ultimate meaninglessness waiting at the end. That's the Apollo in all of us, the part that sees clearly but chooses to act anyway, the part that knows better but loves regardless, the part that understands the futility but creates beauty in defiance of that understanding. And perhaps that's why Apollo remained one of the most beloved gods throughout antiquity. Not because he was perfect or all-powerful or free from suffering, but because he showed what it meant to bear consciousness with grace. He carried the unbearable burden of perfect knowledge and still found reasons to play music, to speak truth, to pursue beauty. He was the god who saw too much and loved anyway. As the classical world faded and new religions replaced the old gods, Apollo lingered longer than most in cultural memory. He became a symbol not just of prophecy or light or music, but of the entire rational, artistic, civilized aspect of human nature. The Renaissance artists painted him, the Romantic poets invoked him, the Age of Enlightenment claimed him as their patron. Apollo transcended his mythological origins to become something larger, an archetype of human consciousness at its most refined and most tormented. And here we are, thousands of years later, still telling his stories, still finding meaning in his myths, still recognizing ourselves in this God who saw everything and could change nothing. We live in an age of unprecedented information and knowledge. We can predict weather patterns weeks in advance, model the spread of diseases, calculate the trajectories of distant planets. We're developing artificial intelligence that can process more information than any human mind. We're moving toward Apollo's gift, toward perfect knowledge, toward complete foresight. But Apollo's myths should make us pause and ask, is that what we really want? If we could see the future clearly, would it free us or trap us? If we had perfect knowledge, would it bring peace or paralysis? If we knew exactly how every decision would unfold, would we make better choices, or would we find ourselves locked into predestined patterns, acting out a script that was already written? Maybe the gift Apollo offers isn't prophecy at all. Maybe it's the example of how to live when knowledge becomes burden, when awareness becomes suffering, when consciousness itself feels like a curse. Maybe he's teaching us that the answer isn't to know less, but to find ways to live beautifully despite knowing too much, to create art in the face of inevitable decay, to love despite certain loss, to speak truth even when it won't be heard, to make music that exists only in the fleeting now, unconcerned with past or future, pure present moment beauty that transcends the tyranny of time. The oracle at Delphi fell silent centuries ago. The last recorded prophecy was given in 393 CE, and then Apollo's voice went quiet. The temple fell into ruin. The sacred site was abandoned, reclaimed by nature, lost to time. But the questions Apollo raised, the contradictions he embodied, the burden he carried, those remain. They echo through every human life that grapples with consciousness, with foreknowledge, with the terrible gift of awareness. Apollo is still watching, still seeing, still knowing. Not as a god on Olympus, but as a pattern woven into human consciousness itself. Every time we see disaster approaching but feel powerless to prevent it, that's Apollo. Every time we love someone while knowing the relationship will end, that's Apollo. Every time we create something beautiful while understanding its impermanence, that's Apollo. Every time we speak truth that we know won't be believed, that's Apollo. Every time we persist in making meaning despite understanding its ultimate futility, that's Apollo. He is the God who saw too much, and he is us. We are all carrying his burden now, in this age of information overload and endless forecasting and constant awareness of global catastrophes unfolding in real time. We all see too much. We all know too much. We're all trapped in the gap between knowledge and power, between seeing what's coming and being able to stop it. We're all, in our way, standing in Apollo's temple, speaking truths that won't be heeded, warning about futures that will unfold exactly as predicted despite our warnings. But we're also still making music, still creating art, still loving, still trying, still finding reasons to play the lyre even though we know the song will end. And in that persistence, in that defiant creation of beauty in the face of certain ending, we honor Apollo's truest legacy. Not his prophecy, but his courage. Not his knowledge, but his heart. Not his ability to see the future, but his willingness to live in the present anyway, fully and completely, despite knowing exactly where it leads. The God who saw too much teaches us finally how to see enough. How to carry awareness without being crushed by it, how to know the ending and still cherish the story, how to be conscious without being paralyzed, how to be Apollo without being destroyed by it. And maybe, just maybe, he's still out there somewhere in his retreat after all the temples fell, playing his lyre for no audience but the wind and the trees. Not prophecy, not divine performance, just music, just beauty. Just the eternal now, where past and future dissolve, and there's only this note, this moment, this breath, where knowledge releases its grip and awareness becomes simply being, where the God who saw too much finally closes his eyes and just feels the music flowing through his hands. That's where Apollo found peace, if he found it at all. Not in perfect knowledge, but in perfect presence. Not in seeing everything, but in experiencing something, anything, with complete attention and no thought for what comes next. And perhaps that's his final gift to us, the reminder that for all our desperate attempts to know the future, the only moment we ever truly have is now. The only time that's real is this one. The only song that matters is the one currently being played. So, play it well. Play it beautifully. Play it like Apollo himself is listening, like your music might make even the god of prophecy forget, for just a moment, what comes next.